Hi everyone in Facebook world, Facebook land. How is everyone doing? Welcome to another discussion with Mindy. My name is Bumi Emenanjo, and I am the founder of Atlas Book Club, a book subscription books company focused on providing globally diverse children's books. You can learn more about us at atlasbookclub.com. And I'm sure you all know Mindy by now, but just in case you don't, Mindy.
Hi, everyone. Mindy Galati, coming to you from Austin, Texas. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and a lawyer, and I'm happy to be here to continue our monthly conversations on children's literature, anti-racism, and all the other amazing topics we cover.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we've been having these conversations. I really look forward to it because I walk away just even more impassioned and feeling, very, very proud of the work that we're doing, but feeling even how much this is needed. So thank you for doing this with us. So just to give everyone a reminder of what we're doing today. Today, we're talking about how to talk to your kids about race, how to have some of those difficult conversations. We had the first part of this conversation last month, and we got such great feedback, and we could have talked more. We kept this discussion short to 30 minutes, but we could have gone on, and we just figured we need to, dive even deeper and come back with another session of this. So when we talked last month, we talked about race nationally as it applies to the United States. I spoke from the perspective of a Black woman raising Black kids, and Mindy spoke from the perspective, of a white woman raising multiracial, anti-racist kids, right? So, but today we wanted to, expand that conversation and now look at it from a global perspective. Yeah. And so we'll just dive right in. So Mindy and I was talking, and you cannot have a conversation about race without thinking about it from a global perspective and without talking about global culture. And so I was giving some additional thought to this the last couple of days. And when you think about the United States, right, we're made up of immigrants, right? We're made up of, immigrants from different parts of the world. We're made up of, Black people who were kidnapped from different parts of Africa and happened to be dropped off here versus other parts of the Americas. But then we're also made up of immigrants who move or migrate to this country either by choice to seek a better life or because they didn't have a choice because their home country, wasn't an ideal place to be, whether it's war or any other circumstance. So in thinking about that and recognizing that the United States is made up of this mix of different global cultures, we can't talk about race and how it impacts us here without deep knowledge of global culture. Mindy?
Oh. Sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is for children to have the perspective of the whole globe, and so not to always center everything on where they live. And kids are very, they know their world, they know their neighborhood, and the world's huge to them. But oftentimes when we're having conversations around race, around
like you froze.
Oh no.
Let's see.
I can still see you. Can you see me?
Looks like we're having some technical difficulty.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Bear with us 1 second. Okay, so we're live. Okay. Yeah, I think. Okay, yeah, I don't think we're live anymore.
It says we're live on Facebook.
No, we're still live.
Okay.
Sorry about that. For some reason, we're having some technical difficulties, so there was a break in the transmission, but it looks like we're still live. Let me confirm really quickly. You can still hear, okay, people are commenting that they can still hear and see us.
Great.
I think I disappeared for a bit. Okay.
You did.
Go ahead.
So what I think is really important is when you're teaching kids about race or about ethnicities or religions, it's imperative that you teach about the whole globe, and to situate your kids as to where they are, geographically, but what surrounds them. And so a lot of what I like to do with my kids when we're talking about, different races or ethnicities is to actually show them on a map. Like kids are very visual. And so my kids' backgrounds are their grandfather's from India, he's an immigrant, and their grandmother's from Iran, she's an immigrant. And long ago, my family was from Ireland. And so, but I'll show them and I'll say, like, look how far it is and what countries are around Iran and India. Like, what does it look like geographically? And you can tie all these messages together. But when we're having conversations on race, I think it's really important that we situate where we are, and that, that skin color and these kinds of identifying characteristics mean something different around the world as well. I think that's important too.
It is. And it's so important how the media that you use to do this. You can use books, of course, we talk about children's books all the time, but then also, what are you consuming? Like, what media are you consuming? What kind of shows are you watching with your kids, right? And you as a parent, what does your Instagram feed, for example, look like? I started making a more deliberate effort to pay attention to what I was consuming and, look at my Instagram feed and what exactly are the images that I'm seeing. Because what happens is when we as adults educate ourselves and are aware and intentional about what we're consuming, that translates into how we talk to our kids. And it gives us that foundational information. So when a topic pops off, which it inevitably does, then you already have that knowledge and some background information. Or at the minimum, you have enough to go, well, let's go Google that. Let's go do some research, right? The kids love research. Like, my kids will make like slideshows on Google Slides about different topics in different countries, because kids are inherently curious and inquisitive. And so we just have to give them enough to ignite that curiosity, but then to go look out for more.
And I think what's important, a point that you made about Google, is that it's important for parents to say, I don't know that answer. Like, I don't know everything there is to know about this topic. And so let's look it up. And I tell my kids this all the time. Sometimes they have some very odd questions that I have no idea why these things exist, but also related to, race and ethnicity and racism. I will often say, let's get a book and read that, and let's figure that out together. And I find that leads them to that curiosity, and also the confidence that they don't need to know everything. Like, they can ask questions. So I think for kids, it's important. For adults too, is that part of being confident is really to be able to say, like, I don't know that answer. Because when you lack confidence is when you try to cover up. And so I think that particularly for white folks out there who want to talk about race, you're not going to know everything. And you don't have a Black experience. And so it's okay to ask Google, it's okay to read and to not have the answers, but it's also like, be curious enough and be confident enough that you can go out and seek information that you don't have. And it teaches your kids an amazing lesson. And I think that, we had talked a little bit earlier about Kamala and her, and what's been happening lately about whether Kamala's half Black because she's from Jamaica, but this is part of that, is like, well, let's talk about that. And so what do you think about that?
I mean, that was really baffling to me. And I want to say that I'm not telling anybody who to vote for. You can go vote for whoever you want to vote for. If you don't know who you want to vote for at this point in the game, I can't help you. So just putting that out there, this is not what that is. But that was really baffling to me. But it also showed that there's a significant lack of education about the history of the slave trade and the history of this country. And it just really showed that we need to be talking to these kids about all of it. First of all, they can handle it. But it also, we do them such a disservice when we don't. I mean, if you don't know about the Middle Passage and how slaves were captured from all over Africa, different parts of Africa, and they were transported to the Americas. And it just so happens, it depends on where they stopped, right? Did they stop in Brazil? Or did they stop in the Caribbean? And that's how we have different Black people and people of the African diaspora in different parts of the world, right? In different parts of the Americas. So that whole concept of, is Kamala Black enough, was just really baffling to me. I'm like, her father is Jamaican. What are we talking about here?
What are we talking about? Yeah.
And
I'll go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, and I'll say what's interesting too on this is that, my daughter identifies with Kamala. My daughter is Indian in her background, and she saw Kamala talk, and she was telling me like, wow, she looks like me. Her skin looks like mine. And it was really interesting because when I told her like, well, her mom was from India and her dad's from Jamaica, and so she's Black and Indian, just that nugget of information not only helps her identify who my daughter identified with her, but also that, again, like you tell them like, this is, these are different places. These are where other people come from other than the United States. And, and my daughter knows that because her grandparents are from there. But I think it's important for all kids to see, and in your point exactly is true, is that there are grownups that I work with as a DEI consultant who don't know why why Black people ended up in certain countries, and they don't tie it to the slave trade. They don't understand that. And so I think it's important also for our kids to show them sort of the historical perspective of where they're from and where we all come from. And that allows you to have conversations more deeply about race, ethnicity, why that matters and doesn't matter, because, it's interesting. My son is 8, and he's reading Ibram Kendi's book Stamped, which is the young adult version of Stamped from the Beginning, and he will come across a passage and he'll just like run out of his room and be like, what is this? Like, I need to share this with you. But those moments are not just confined to that lesson. It's like, let's talk about that globally. Like, what does that mean across the world? And how do we view things across the world?
Yeah. And it helps, doing that helps them put it in context. That's what it does. And it also helps them to have a more comprehensive understanding. So that way, when they're having conversations as they get older, they understand the different nuances. And, with the whole Kamala, well, it's not a controversy, but that whole discussion that was going on, it made me think about, because kids hear everything. You have CNN on, if you have CNN or whatever news channel on, they may be in the other room, but they're hearing it and they're picking up on all these things, right? And you just don't know if the conversation comes up and, the panel is talking about, this discussion, is Kamala Black enough? I wonder if there's a mixed race girl who's part Jamaican and part white listening to this. I'm going like, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Kids hear everything. They pick up on it. They know, they may not fully understand, but they hear and they know what's going on. So which is where it's our job as parents to make sure that we're providing them with enough information and enough context to process, right? Because my oldest, he's 13, and there's some things he talks about. Well, he'll be 13 next week. And there's some things he talks about. Oh, I didn't even know you knew that. Because they're on TikTok and YouTube and all these different things, picking up snippets of information and processing it. So it's up to us to give them everything, well, as much as is age appropriate, so that they can process in context.
Yeah, and I think that's how you raise like a critical thinker, is by giving them context. Because, a lot of times it's like, I'll ask people when I do workshops, I'll say, reflect on who told you certain things that you took as an absolute truth. Like an example I'll give is like, think back to your first funeral you went to. Who told you what to wear? And like, what did they tell you? Because a lot of times when we're kids, people tell us things that are told to us as like, this is the fact, that's all it is. And there's no context and there's no reason given why this is the answer. And as hard as it is sometimes to always answer the why to your kids when they're constantly asking why, that's how you teach critical thinking. And I find that as, something came up this week that was really interesting for me, which was I'm working with an organization who is led by a Black CEO. And he said, we just been taught our whole lives not to talk about race. And so now we're about to talk about race at work, and I'm nervous. And this is the same of what parents say about kids. They talk to me about this a lot, like, well, how should we talk about this, or why, or we've always been told we shouldn't. And what I counter back is like, there's a reason you were told not to talk about race. And that's like white supremacy has told us all to not talk about it, because it does not want us to unravel, how insidious and how misaligned it is, and how terrible it is, and what the effects are. Because once we start talking about race and very openly and very honestly, that's when the systems get dismantled. So, when I'm talking anti-racism with companies or children, it's the same conversation. It's like, we're going to have open conversations, because when you shine light on things, they say sunlight's the best disinfectant. It's like conversation is the best way to counter systematic issues, because you bring them to light. And so, and for discussions of race with kids, what we're talking about today is this global perspective is the way to really counter systems of oppression, because globally there are systems of oppression that exist, but it's very different in other countries. And we can pool in different countries where, if you talk to your daughters about, why there isn't been a female leader in the United States, you can do a comparative analysis to other countries and why they always have women prime ministers or presidents. And that's a way forward in that global, competency. And you can start it very young, and then it's so seamless for them as they get older.
Yeah. And no, I totally agree. And also, when you think about it, kids, they already have a concept or idea in their head. So whether you're talking about it or not, it's there, and we'll never know what's there unless we talk about it, because you just don't know if what they've absorbed is something untrue or a dangerous stereotype, right? You won't know unless you talk about it. So let me give an example, and I may have told this story before. When my daughter was in second grade, and she goes to a school that's predominantly white, I took a book, as I usually do, as a guest reader to her class, to read to her class. I always take a book set in a different country. So I happened to take a book that was set in Burkina Faso, and I read the book to the class, and I was reading in it. This little girl raises her hand, and I think she may have been mixed race, actually. I can't remember. But anyway, she raises her hand, and she said, "Excuse me, that book you're reading, that book is racist." And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that book is racist? Why did you say that? And she said, because there are no white people in that book. And so the concept, it just hit me that, wow, the notion that there are countries around the world where Black people are a majority, where there are no white people, was so foreign to this little girl. And that just blew my mind. And it just shows that a lot of our system is very Eurocentric, and we need to teach our kids using, the exposure to global culture. We need to teach them such that whiteness is not so centered, because quite frankly, we are doing them a disservice when we don't do this, because they're going to grow up and work in a workforce that is going to be more globally diverse than ever, and so teaching them global awareness now actually prepares them for that future workforce.
For sure. And parents are always worried, like, what grades are my kids getting? What school are they going to go to? And I'm telling you, as someone who does this every day of her life, advise businesses on who they should keep and who they should not keep. There are people who go to the best schools and get the best jobs, and they get in, and they're so lacking in cultural competency, or so wrought with bias and explicit and implicit, and they operate from a framework of racism, even if they don't know it, and they lose their jobs. And it's just going to continue. It's going to continue. And we're going to be a quote, a minority majority country. I don't love that term. But if you are walking through this life without talking about race, ethnicity, having a global perspective, having a cultural competency within your own home, you're doing as much as a disservice to your kids than if you just like never made them do their homework, because they will go to work and they will be the people that I'm asked to investigate or interview and determine whether they're going to be able to last in the company. I mean, and there's a company that I'm working with that is starting over this next year. They've asked me to develop performance metrics for measuring whether their leaders are anti-racist.
What?
The gigantic company, and that's my duty for the next year is to figure out how that happens. And so if you have your child graduate college and come work for this company and get, be in a good position as a leader, and they have never had these conversations, they're going to not last, because now companies, and this will probably be the first very large company to release this, where they're going to say part of your performance basis and your performance review will be, are you exemplifying anti-racist leader characteristics? And so now, now is the time. And if you're not talking to your kids about Kamala, who cares what party she's from? You need to be talking about her. She's an important person in this world, win or lose. And she brings that global, that dynamic perspective. And I'll say for kids who are multi-ethnic like mine, she represents something so powerful that, my daughter talks about her all the time, and we don't watch news and TV, but she watched a video of her, but having that global perspective of who she is and her background, it was really beautiful to see those connections made within my own child.
It's so important. So, and before I forget, so I wanted to jump on real quickly on what you just said. I was actually talking to a principal of a school yesterday and just talking about bringing, more diversity to their school library and curriculum. And that's the same thing I told her. I told her that it's just as important. Global awareness should be just as important as math and science and English. And I hadn't even talked to you about that, And so I'm really happy to hear it from the corporate perspective that that's what's going on. So, okay, so we have one question here, and we have just a few more minutes, so feel free to drop some questions in the comments and we'll take them. Here it says, is there a fine line between overburdening our kids with race issues or concerns and keeping them aware of the realities? Is there a fine line between overburdening them with race issues versus keeping them aware of the realities?
So my opinion is this. I don't think it's overburdening, but you have to celebrate. So today's the day that Pharrell and Jay-Z released their Entrepreneur song, and it's all about Black excellence. And so you can't teach about race, and Black people or whichever demographic from oppression only. You have to teach about the beauty of it and the excellence and the appreciation of the culture. And so you're not going to burden your children if you're teaching them about Black people as a dynamic group and from all over the world and from all over, every continent. And so, but I also think that it's okay to introduce tough topics to kids. It's good for kids to learn how to have difficult conversations that really hurt inside and that don't feel comfortable. It's not, making them, pouring over like devastating images or something. But I don't think it's, to me that there isn't quite a fine line. It's more of, it's like always continue that walk along that line. And for me, it's countering some of the negativity in how we approach race issues with like the opposite side. Like someone brought up into me a meeting yesterday, which was stop using data about, like how little women of color make and start producing data of like how much white people make and center it on like how privileged they are instead of how disproportionately negatively affected Black and brown folks are, because it changes the dynamic. And so I like the perspective shift, which is, in our house, we celebrate Black and brown excellence. And we also talk about the pain. And I think it's okay. I think kids can handle it. At least my kids can. And, my kids hear this day in and day out. And sometimes they're sitting right next to me during these conversations. Luckily not today. But they do hear it. And I don't think it's that overwhelming for them.
I don't think so either. And it helps them build empathy. it helps them build empathy. It helps them recognize what's right and what's wrong, you know? And I love the fact that you said you celebrate Black excellence. Absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about, you know, a particular culture, or let's just put it this way. If you're talking about a loved one, you don't always just talk about their pain, right? You talk about what they excel at. You talk about, oh, I went over there and they made me a nice dinner. Like, you know, you talk about them holistically. And that's the thing. Like, if you're approaching discussions about race and diversity in an authentic, holistic manner, it will become so natural, and you have to approach it in a way that it's woven into the DNA of your family. Like, this is just what we do, you know? And if you're picking, again, going back to children's books, the authors have already done the work for you. They've made it very easy. You just pick up, even if it's just picking up a book every night, honestly, every night, bedtime, you pick up a book, and you don't have to read the whole book, maybe a couple of chapters, or if it's a picture book, maybe you read half of it, and it is set in a different country, and you do that every night for a month. That's something. Because what happens is, when you're watching TV in the middle of the day, maybe 2 weeks later, and you see, you know, a South Asian person walk across the, I mean, the kids pick up on that, and that can be a jumping off for a different conversation, you know? So it just has to be so woven into who you are as a family that it becomes second nature. And if you celebrate, you know, these cultures, when you see them experiencing pain, then it feels only natural to talk about that too, you know? So I want to have, let's see, we're running out of time.
And can I add
go
one
ahead.
caveat to that? Is
Yeah.
I also think it's important to just celebrate people, even if they're mediocre.
Yes.
So you don't have to be excellent to be a great human being, and you don't have to be excellent at anything to be human, fully human. And so I think sometimes we also can fall into the trappings of like, oh, unless you're, you know, unless you're like I'll use myself as a woman, like, unless you're like, you know, achieving all these metrics, like, you're not going to get celebrated. Like, we should celebrate people. And that's where you bring in the children's books. So just normal life. Like, if you have Black and brown kids that are just riding the bus and there's no celebration of their excellence, but it's just representation and understanding that the world is bigger than what you are. I think that's what's important. But I do like to add that little caveat that, like, nobody has to be excellent to be treated well, respected, and loved. So.
Absolutely. And if you followed me on Atlas Book Club, you know my favorite books are books where kids are just being kids. And why? Because that's what other kids resonate with. That's what they connect with the most. So we'll do a couple of book recommendations, and then we'll be out of here. Historical fiction books are really, really good for kids, especially if they're in that middle grade or young adult age, because it provides that context that we're talking about. And this is fantastic. A Crack in the Sea. This was set by H.M. Bowman. This is set in different parts of the world, but it's this ship, this British ship that takes slaves from Africa on their way to Jamaica. And but it's a historical fiction kind of mixed with like fantasy. It's really, really good. And then I have another one here, I Am Brown by Lantana Publishing. They're one of my favorite publishers. And this celebrates brown kids from different parts of the world. So this just allows a child to see like, oh, you know, there are brown kids in Egypt and brown kids in India, etc. So that's really good. And then lastly, we featured Jamaica and Haiti and Brazil, some of these countries, and we had some information about the slave trade in the boxes. So check us out at atlasbookclub.com. We'll put all the links down so you can check out those boxes. So if your child wants to learn more about Kamala Harris's heritage, Jamaica, we did a Jamaica box, and we also have an India box. So that's that. And I think, let's see, no more questions, but we covered a lot. We packed that in there. We did.
Pack it in every time.
I love it. Thank you so much, Mindy. It's always a pleasure. Thank you everyone for, you know, stopping by and listening to us chat. And, you know, hopefully you picked up some valuable resource from this. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Oh, wrong one. Wrong button.